All right, so we are on Genesis chapter 4. Kathy found some interesting information to share with us about Cain and Abel. Am I correct?
Yeah, yeah. There was a lot of information that was pretty much the same, but there was just some interesting. Of course, said that Abel was the second son of Adam and Eve, slain by his brother Cain. Abel's name, meaning breath or vapor, is associated with the shortness of his life.
Hmm.
Um, he was a shepherd and a possessor of flocks and herds. Cain was a tiller of the ground. Um, it says it was not an occupation, however, that parted these first two brothers in the world, but their conception of what was pleasing and acceptable to God. Abel feared God, and because he did, he offered to God the best of his flock. His was a sacrifice of blood and represented the surrender of the heart to God. Cain brought what he gathered from the earth, an offering representing his own effort. Because God accepted Abel's offering and not Cain's, the angry brothers slew Abel in the field. But Abel's blood cried from the ground for punishment. Abel's blood is placed alongside Christ's shed blood, and there's a reference to Hebrews 12:24, which is better than Abel's in that his blood cried out for vengeance, but the blood of Christ cries out for mercy. Abel's blood, although the blood of a righteous man, Matthew 23:35, cannot atone, but Christ's blood is efficacious. I don't know how you say that. Efficacious, I think it is. Um,
What did you say
Abel
that Hebrews what?
12:24.
12:24. Okay.
Um, Abel is unique among the Bible in a fourfold direction. He was the first one of the human race to die. He was the first person on earth to be murdered. He was the first man to be associated with Christ. He was the first saint to present an offering acceptable to God. I thought those first were a little interesting.
Yeah, so Hebrews 12:24 says, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel.
Can you take the firsts again? First to be
Yeah, so
murdered.
I'm going to start because it's like a broken sentence into multiple verses. So 22 it says, "But you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels in festal gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel." That seems like a riddle to me.
It does.
We did study Hebrews.
Kim, those first were he was the first of the human race to die. He was the first person on earth to be murdered. He was the first man to be associated with Christ. He was the first saint to present an offering acceptable to God.
Thank you.
And then when you go over to Cain, um, he was the eldest son of Adam and Eve, the first man to be born naturally, and he was the founder of the family of Kenites.
Oh, now that the guy in the morning talks a lot about the Kenites. So he was what? He was the first.
He was the founder of the family of Kenites.
Cain.
Cain was, yeah. And it has references to, it says Kenite is called Cain in the Hebrew.
Okay, Cain was the founder of the
Kenites.
Kenn.
Kenites.
Okay, say that again. Okay, he was the founder of the Canaanites.
Yeah, and then
Cain.
it says Kenite is called Cain in the Hebrew. Now they're spelling it with a K. The Cain in Hebrew, they're spelling it with a K, like Kenite, but
So they're saying like the Cain would be Kain
right,
in the Hebrew.
in the Hebrew.
That's a piece of a puzzle that,
And there are references to Genesis, Numbers, Hebrews, First John, and Jude.
okay, Genesis, I'm assuming
Genesis 4,
4. Okay, and then,
Numbers 24, 22,
okay,
Hebrews 11, 4,
okay,
First John 3, 12,
okay,
Jude 11.
okay. That's it.
Um,
That's you would want to make a note on that because the Kenites do that. It's a huge key. I haven't figured it out yet, but he has a whole teaching on the Kenites.
Can you tell
um,
me what was it, First John?
First John 3, 12,
And then what was after that?
Jude 11.
Mine says Jude 1:11. Does yours just say 11?
Well,
is
there only is one chapter in
there,
Jude.
yeah,
Yeah.
there is no Jude. Yeah, gotcha.
The terrible story of Cain proves how quickly man's fallen nature developed. It did not take long for his heart to become desperately wicked, and the line of Cain continued its sin. It was in such a foul sin of polygamy. It was in such the foul sin of polygamy was first experienced.
Oh, wait, repeat that now.
It was in such this continued sin, the line of Cain. It was in such the foul sin of polygamy was first experienced. So that came from Cain, polygamy, apparently.
P-O-L-O-G-A-M-Y.
Polygamy.
P-O-L-Y-G-M.
Gamy.
Gamy was, do they give a reference for that?
No,
Okay. So that's interesting.
by calling Cain was an agriculturalist, but he was not happy in his calling since he did not fear God. His heart became jealous as he witnessed the happiness of his brother Abel and his favor with God. Ultimately, he yielded to his jealous feelings and slew Abel, just as the Jews, for envy, sought Christ's death. Because Cain's heart was destitute of love, his sacrifice had no heart in it, and there was therefore miserable, worthless, and unacceptable to God. The sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but the prayer of the upright is his delight. Cain was right in his desire to bring an offering, but wrong in his doing. He sought to draw near to God with the product of his own labor. Abel brought the firstborn of the flock, a blood offering, the divine acceptance of which provoked Cain's evil temper, for he was wroth. And then it goes on to say that Cain had the mark. God put a mark on Cain, but the scripture does not say what it was, but evidently it was sufficient to make him feel the wrath of God and the abhorrence of his fellow men. Yet the punishment of Cain reveals a judgment mingled with mercy. His brand, perhaps some kind of stigma, made Cain realize the awfulness of the sin of the fratricide, but acted as protection against the violence of the avenger of the blood. The narrative seems to affirm that Cain's mark was not consigning him to perpetual punishment, but was a token of God's redemptive compassion. I think about that. I think, okay, he had that mark, so he knew he was branded. And people knew it too. So therefore, he's probably subject to living a life of loneliness because nobody wants anything to do with him. But yet it's saying it was kind of God's mercy, I guess, that he just didn't He just didn't kill him.
Well, I think too, like the fact that what he did was so despicable that people would have killed him,
Yeah.
and God showed mercy on him.
Hmm.
But then I was thinking too about like the offerings, and reminded me of, I think it was Rich Tarlowski said, the financial planner. He said that there was a guy that went to church, and I'm just paraphrasing what he said, but he said he meant to give $20, but he accidentally gave 500. And he said that God would honor the 20 because that's where his heart really was. And Stan and I, we're in Malachi right now with our devotions, and one of the things he talked about in there was, how giving is an opportunity to show God how much we trust him. And it was like, and then I think about too, like Cain showing up and giving an offering from his heart that he wasn't sincere about, or he had a wrong heart about. I don't know.
That was it. I just thought there was some little bit of interesting.
It was very good. Yeah, that the fact that Cain was the founder of the Kenites, and that polygamy, because I was just thinking about polygamy the other day. Stan and I were talking about that. Like, where did that come from? If God put man and woman together in Genesis, then how did we end up with man and many women? Because even David had like 20 wives. Of course, a lot of that's political, I guess. All right, I think we were ready to move on to the second half of chapter 4, weren't we? 17, verse 17. Did anybody have their Bibles marked?
Yeah, that's where we're at, 17.
All right. Oh, Kim's gone. Okay, I will read. Genesis chapter 4, verse 17. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. When he built a city, he called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad fathered Mahujael, and Mahujael fathered Methuselah, and Methuselah fathered Lamech, and Lamech took two wives. The name of one was Adah, and the other was Zillah. Adah bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of those who play the lyre and the pipe. Zillah also bore Tubal-Cain, and he was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. The sister of Tubal-Cain was Nemah. Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son, called him Seth. For she said, God has appointed for me another offspring. See, this is why I don't think she had a bunch of kids yet. And God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. To Seth also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. All right, Cindy, whenever you're ready.
4:17, Cain knew his wife. Cain's wife obviously was one of Adam's later daughters. Reference to 5 verse 4. By Moses' time, this kind of close marriage was forbidden because of genetic decay. Enoch, his name means initiation, and was symbolic of the new city where Cain would try to mitigate his curse. Verse 19, 2 wives. No reason is given on Lamech's part for the first recorded instance of bigamy. He led the Canaanites in open rebellion against God by his violation of marriage law. Verse 20, Jabal.
Oh, I guess this is where the polygamy came in with Lamech. Because that's down through his bloodline. Lamech is the first polygamist there.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Verse 20, Jabal. He invented tents and inaugurated the nomadic life of herdsmen, so common in the Middle East and elsewhere. 21, Jubal. He invented both string and wind instruments. 22, Tubal Cain. He invented metallurgy. 23 to 24. Lamech killed someone in self-defense. He told his wives that they need not fear any harm coming to them for the killing, because if anyone tried to retaliate, he would retaliate and kill them. He thought that if God promised sevenfold vengeance on anyone killing Cain, he would give 77-fold vengeance on anyone attacking Lamech.
I find that interesting because it said he
Verse-
led an open rebellion against God. So why would God honor him? That metallurgically, how do you spell that? Metal.
Metallurgy.
Thank you.
Verse 25, Seth. With Cain removed as the older brother and heir of the family blessing, and with Abel dead, God graciously gave Adam and Eve a godly son, through whom the seed of redemption would be passed all the way to Jesus Christ. Verse 26, men began to call on the name of the Lord. As men realized their inherent sinfulness with no human means to appease God's righteous indignation and wrath over their multiplied iniquities, they turned to God for mercy and grace in hope of a restored personal relationship. And that's it.
Well, I wonder too, like if they were just starting to call on the Lord at the end there, like he might have not had a proper understanding of God. Maybe he was kind of like the Pharaohs, like if you did this right, then you would get the rain and so maybe Lamech's view of God was wrong. Whenever you're ready, Kathy.
Okay, the builder, this is verses 16 to 24. Move. God kept his word and protected Cain as he wandered. One day he found a place that seemed right for him to settle down, and he decided to build a city. The earth wouldn't yield its strength to Cain's labor as a farmer, but Cain could labor and build on the earth and succeed. However, Cain never ceased to be a fugitive, for the name of the land where he settled means wandering. His citizenship wasn't in heaven, nor did he have any hope to reach the heavenly city. The only heaven Cain knew was his city on earth. There's a note here. It says, we must not imagine that Cain's city was like our modern cities. It was a settlement of people for mutual help and protection. Some would live in tents and others in more permanent dwellings, and there might be a wall to protect them.
So is he saying, okay, so this is saying that he named the city after Enoch, his son. And John MacArthur said his son, the name meant initiation, but Worsby said another word. It meant
It means wandering.
wandering.
Yeah, the land where he settled means wandering.
Thank you.
Um, was Cain a married man before he wandered from Eden, or did he find a wife during his travels? Did he tell her he had murdered his brother? We don't know, but surely he had to explain the mark God had put on him. It was normal for Cain to seek a wife, for he not only wanted to build a city, but he also wanted to build a family. How else could his name be remembered but in his descendants? Cain didn't know that his name and foul deeds would be written in the word of God for everybody to read. Cain's wife bore him a son whom he named Enoch, which is related to the Hebrew word for consecrated. Cain named his city after his son, but we aren't told to whom or to what the city was consecrated. 6 generations of Cain's descendants are named, some of whom were famous. Lamech was the first bigamist. He was also a boastful man and a killer. Why or how the young man wounded him, we don't know, but why should a young man be killed because he caused a wound? Lamech's mentioning of Cain's protection in verse 24 indicates that Cain's story was passed from generation to generation. It also suggests that Lamech thought that God's protection extended to him as well. If God would avenge a murderer like Cain, then surely he would avenge Lamech for protecting himself. Note that Lamech wants God's protection, but he doesn't mention God's name. The people in the city of Enoch had varied occupations. Some followed Jabal and took care of livestock, in verse 20. Others learned from Jabal's brother Jubal, and devoted themselves to making and playing musical instruments, verse 21. The followers of Tubal-Cain were metal workers, verse 22, which suggests the manufacture of farm implements, building tools, and personal weapons. Cain lived in a society that was rich in culture as well as in industry and food production. In the city of Enoch, they had everything but God. When you put Cain's family tree next to that of Seth, you can't help but notice the similarity in names. You have Enoch and Enosh. And Enoch, I'm going to butcher these names, Mahaziel and Mahalalel, Methuselah and Methuselah, and Lamech. Cain's Lamech had 3 sons, Jabal, Jubal, and Tubal-Cain. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. What does this similarity in names mean? Perhaps it's God's way of telling us that the godless line of Cain, which is still with us, does its best to imitate the godly line of Seth. After all, Satan is the counterfeit. He can imitate the names of the true believers, but he can't produce the believers. There's an Enoch in both genealogies, but Cain's Enoch didn't walk with God and one day disappear and go to heaven. What's in a name? Nothing if you don't know and belong to the Lord. But the tragedy is that these 2 lines, the ungodly line of Cain and the godly line of Seth, came together and merged. The wall of separation came down, and this eventually created the wicked society whose sins brought on the judgment of the flood. Lamech's brand of violence spread, and by the time of the flood, only 8 people believed God's warning and acted upon it by faith. The rest were destroyed. Cain's family tree ends with the family of Lamech, an arrogant murderer whose 3 sons manufactured things for this world. Seth's line ends with Noah, whose 3 sons gave the world a new beginning after the flood. The world of that day probably admired Cain's achievements. God wiped them off the face of the earth. And the world is passing away and the lust of it, but he who does the will of God abides forever. 1 John 2:17. That's it.
Okay. My reading is very short. 17 through 24. What follows Cain's punishment is the tale of two families, a theme that shows up repeatedly throughout Genesis. Unfortunately, Cain's murderous ways infected his family line. By the time we get to his great grandson, we find a man bragging about his own violence. I killed a man for wounding me, Lamech boasted. Notice too that Lamech was talking about his wives, plural. God's perfect design is only 4 chapters old, and already we find people reveling in bloodshed and flouting his design for marriage. The next. Oh, that's interesting. The next part covers 425 all the way through 532, but it's very, very short. Do you want? I guess I'll go ahead and read it. In contrast to Cain's line, God raised up another family tree. In place of Abel, God granted Eve a son named Seth. Seth typified the same type of worship as his deceased brother Abel, because in connection with Seth, people began to call on the name of the Lord. The prideful way of worship, Cain's way, see Jude 11, points to itself. The humble way of worship, Abel and Seth's way, calls out to God. It is no surprise then that when God wanted to choose an obedient servant hundreds of years later, that servant, Noah, would come from Seth's line. That literally covered my chapter 5 too. So, any thoughts? Any additional commentaries, questions?
I think back when Kathy was reading about when Cain left and was roaming around, is it Nod or Enoch that means wanderer, Kathy? Because remember he went and he settled in the land of Nod.
Um,
You mean Cain settled in the land of Nod?
Well, that's what happened in verse 16 yesterday.
Oh, okay.
So I was just wondering if that's Nod means wanderer instead of Enoch, because Enoch meant something else, didn't it?
Yeah,
it says the land where he settled means wandering. Cain
Okay.
never ceased to be a fugitive, for the name of the land where he settled means wandering. Didn't
Oh,
say
I thank you for clarifying that because I had Enoch's name.
no, name of the land.
Okay. I
Oh, yeah.
misunderstood you.
Nod means wandering. It says in my
Oh, I see why 5 was very short for me because it's the genealogy. Any other
I
thoughts?
just I just looked up that Jubal in this book, and it said he's the inventor of musical instruments. Jubilee is from his name, which is used to describe the trumpet employed at the glad time of the Jewish Jubilee. So that's where they get Jubilee from.
I'm looking here to find Jubal. His brother's name was Jubal. How do you spell Jubilee?
Jubilee.
Jubilee.
Lee. And then that Jabal, it just says that he became the father of those dwelling in tents and possessing cattle. Doesn't say a whole lot about him.
You actually still see them when you go over there. When we went in 17, we went for a Jeep excursion out into the desert, and there, I even forget what they call them, but there were just like wanderers or gypsies out in the desert.
Were they like nomads?
Mm-hmm. And they had camels. They had camels, and the camels are kind of like their dogs, like they hung with them. And
Are we starting chapter 5 tomorrow?
yes, it's
Find
a
it interesting
Enoch.
that these names paralleled the other names. Like,
Yeah, I
other
agree.
than
I thought
the
that when I was
spelling,
reading it. I was like, Enoch, wait a minute. I thought Enoch was a good guy. He walked with God. Well, it's not this one. It's in Seth's line.
like Lamech, there's two. There's the son of Methuselah, who is of the race of Cain. He had two wives, Ada and Zillah. It's not difficult to trace the moral character of Lamech, a close resemblance to Cain. We can detect the same haughty spirit, the same self-confidence, the same disregard of human life, the same absence of reverence of God. His address to his wives is that one of who glories in self-strength and vigor. And then you have the other Lamech, which is the son of Methuselah, who is the father of Noah, and an ancestor of Christ. I just thought that was interesting that you had the names so close, but opposite ends of the spectrum.
I thought it was interesting too that it said that Seth's line ends with Noah. Wonder why he said it that way. Because Noah's family continued on.
Maybe
Yeah.
because they were the evil people that got killed in the flood.
Yeah, but he had daughters, didn't he?
Whom?
Noah.
Yes.
So that's why Seth's line ended.
Or the curse was broken. You go back to Adam and Eve, they ate the forbidden fruit, they did what they weren't supposed to, which was a curse,
Mm-hmm.
and when people say, oh, that's you're just like your mother, you're just like your father, and that to me is like, no. It's when the lineage stops there, when you break that curse of that family. So maybe that's what he did.
Amber, is that a cat?
No, that's my shirt.
It looks like you're holding a
That's so
cat.
funny.
When she first came on, I thought, oh, what is she holding? And I thought the
Really?
same thing.
It's tie-dye, so yeah, that probably it does look weird. That's
Sorry.
funny. Oh, you're fine.
All right. Are we ready? Any other thoughts on this section? Tomorrow we'll pick up at chapter 5, if not. All right.
All these people are going to get interesting, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be hard to keep track of them all.
Mm-hmm.
I'll read it, and then a couple months from now, I'll be like, now, wait a minute. Who was so and so? And
Yeah, I'm not quite sure on, because I had written somebody's Lamech son was a great grandson of Cain, but did you say it's a great great grandson? And Lamech,
Great.
three
Wait.
greats.
I think.
was that in my reading?
No, I think you just
I
mentioned
don't think
it.
I read that.
I think it was. I'm not sure.
Is Cain's by the time we get to yes, okay. By the time we get to his great, 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 three greats grandson, Lamech was boasting.
Three. So
Three
he says
greats.
great, great, great.
Of
Yeah.
Cain.
Yeah.
And let's see. And Seth was the grandfather of Noah. Was Methuselah Seth's son? This doesn't matter. I don't know why I'm worried. I mean, there's not going to be a quiz.
Well, we'll go into
might
it again
be.
here in chapter 5.
Okay,
We'll go into Seth's line in chapter 5.
I'll try to pick it up then.
Because they all live like to 1,000 years too at this point. All right, everybody unmute. It's time to see which state is the fastest. Are we ready? John the Baptist called the Pharisees and the Sadducees a generation of vipers. True or false?
True.
That is true. You can find that in Matthew 3:7. He did call the Pharisees and the Sadducees a generation of vipers. However, his head was chopped off due to a woman.
She must have been a viper too.
She was very much a viper, Herodias,
I was going to use another word, but
or Jezebel.
yeah, that'll work.
All right, this concludes the reading of God's word for today.
Safe travels.
For certain.
For sure, for certain.
For certain.
Thank you, Lori. All right, see you guys tomorrow morning, regular time. Oh, hang on, let me stop recording.